GoForThe2.com in with the Week 1 2023 college football picks. Nothing better. Week 0 kicked off last week. We saw Notre Dame and USC pick up dominating victories. Notre Dame picked up their sixth straight over the midshipmen. They cover the 20.5-point number. On the flip side, Caleb Williams, 4 touchdown passes, 278 yards, but USC does not cover the 30.5-point number, and all eyes are on the full slate of action for week number 1. If you want all the top 25 info, you want all the games, futures, everything, tune into College Football Today every Saturday morning, 9 a.m. to noon, Sports Grid Radio, sportsgrid.com, also Sirius XM channel 159. We have you covered from start to finish. Best bets, props, you name it, we have it covered on College Football Today. And then every night, 10 p.m., to midnight, Carver and Lisi, we go through everything, best bets and college and pro picks every Thursday and Friday night. So check it out, Sports Grid Radio, Sirius Channel 159, 10 p.m. to midnight, Monday through Friday. Let's jump right into the week 1 selections. I'm going to start with the early slate. Utah opened as a 9.5-point favorite. It's down to 6.5. Obviously, the health of starting quarterback Cam Rising in doubt. He had the ACL in January in terms of the bowl loss to Penn State. It looks like he might play, but to me, it doesn't matter. His backup, Barnes, will be in this matchup if Cam Rising can't play. But to me, it doesn't matter. It comes down to the physicality of the offensive line and defensive line of Utah. Utah pounded the rock for over 200 yards per game, held opposing offenses to only 111 yards on the ground, and I think that's where the difference is. Even when you look at last year's matchup with Anthony Richardson and the Florida Gators, Florida did pick up the 29-26 win last year in Gainesville. They were a 2.5-point underdog. They pounded the rock for 283 on the Utah defense, but 168 came on the ground through the athleticism of Anthony Richardson. New starting quarterback Graham Mertz is a pure pocket passer. He struggled with consistency back during his days in Wisconsin. He's not going to put the type of pressure on the Utah defense on the perimeter. Let's keep in mind as well, Utah, very good home team last year. 6-0 at home. They won their 5 FBS games by an average margin of victory of 23 points per game. On the flip side, you had a Florida team that was just 1-5 on the road, lost those 5 games by an average margin of defeat of 13.6 points per game, and that's where I give the edge to the Pac-12 champion Utah Utes in this ballgame. Both teams were 5-1. Florida 5-1 as an underdog. Only game they lost was against Oregon State. In terms of the number as an underdog, Billy Napier did a pretty good job. On the flip side, Utah 5-1 against the number at home. To me, it comes down to the physicality. Laying now under a touchdown. I think Utah does win this ball game convincingly. They're my pick for the Pac-12. I think they have the opportunity to go three-peat because of the offense and defensive line play, and we'll see how it plays out in Salt Lake City this coming Thursday. Turn our attention to the Saturday games. There's some trends that I think you need to keep an eye out. We'll start early kick in terms of Chestnut Hill. Boston College laying a huge number against a MAC team in terms of Northern Illinois. Northern Illinois under 500 last year. Their starting quarterback, Rocky Lombardi, banged up. Only 5 touchdowns, 1 interception, 66% completion percentage. They played inconsistent after Lombardi got hurt in the early part of the year, but he's back. There's a veteran team around him. They do have 6 starters coming back on defense as well, but this is more about what is the identity of Boston College right now. Phil Jurkovec is now the starting quarterback at Pittsburgh. Leading wide receiver Zay Flowers is now trying to hook up with Lamar Jackson in Baltimore. And more importantly, you look at the rushing attack of Boston College last year. Ranked 130th out of 131 teams in all of FBS, right above UMass last year. They only averaged 63 rushing yards per game, but more importantly, 2 yards per carry. When you can't run the football consistently, you're put into predictable long third down situations, and Boston College only converted 35% of their third down opportunities. They also got sacked. The offensive line allowed 46 total sacks in 12 games last year. That's going to put a lot of pressure, in my opinion, on second-year starter Emmett Moorhead. He did play well last year in terms of limited action, 59% completion percentage, 10 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. But I still give the edge to Northern Illinois. I think Boston College has regressed since the COVID year with Jeff Hafley. They're losing players. They're losing speed on the perimeter. They might win, but I think Northern Illinois is live with a veteran quarterback in Rocky Lombardi, coupled with the fact 2 sophomores and a potential freshman starting in the secondary. I like that matchup, especially in terms of a week 1 game with Rocky Lombardi at the helm. We talked about it all offseason. When you have inexperience or players that are not used to playing together as a unit, especially in a week 1 matchup, communication, the ability not to read coverage could always be a concern, and that's why I think Northern Illinois is live in Chestnut Hill, plus the 9.5 this coming weekend. Another battle takes place in Wyoming. You have Texas Tech laying, it opened at 14.5, down now across the state to around, not just Jersey, but across the nation, down around 13.5. Now, Wyoming, their quarterback Peasley, they're a methodical offense. They want to ground and pound, work off of play action, keep you in front of them in terms of a lower scoring game. The clock could maybe go into their favor with the rule changes in college football. Only 9 starters coming back on that defense. This wasn't a bad defense overall. Statistically, gave up around 350 total yards of defense. But on the flip side, you have Joey McGuire. You have Texas Tech. This is a team that really gelled, especially in the second half of the season. They do have their quarterback, Tyler Shuck, and backup Brennan Morton, that I think can really put pressure on opposing defenses, not in terms of just this game, but throughout the Big 12 season. And keep in mind, they do have a Week 2 matchup in Lubbock against Bo Nix and the Oregon Ducks. Taj Brooks, one of the best running backs in the Big 12, 600-plus yards, average 4.9 yards per carry, 7 rushing touchdowns, and they have 18 starters coming back. But you look at the offensive progression by Texas Tech last year. This is why I think they cover this number Saturday night in Laramie. You look at Texas Tech in the first half of the season with their former quarterback, Donovan Smith. The first half of the year, first 6 games, they averaged against FBS opponents 53.6 pass attempts per game. The offensive line was inconsistent. They weren't running the football as well. That put a lot more pressure on the quarterback, Donovan Smith, Morton, whoever was in there at any given time in the first half of the season. However, Joey McGuire, the offensive staff, got that offensive line playing very well. Last 7 games of the regular season, they were 5-2 overall. They pounded the rock for 193.6 rushing yards per game, and their pass attempts went down during that span as well, 37.8. So they were more balanced as the season wore on. I don't care that Ole Miss didn't have maybe a full slate or a full defensive unit. They beat them up at the point of attack. They grounded, pound, Sir Roderick Thompson, Taj Brooks ran all over that defense, including Tyler Shuck. And I think this is one of the most physical teams in the Big 12 this year. They're my pick to absolutely win it. And I'm going to lay the 13.5 on the road in Laramie against Wyoming. Another matchup taking place in Charlotte. We have Drake May, North Carolina, laying a short number against Spencer Rattler and Shane Beamer in this ballgame. Obviously, battle of the Carolinas. We saw South Carolina get this bowl victory a couple of years ago. But this comes down to 2 factors. Which team and coach do you buy more into? Are you buying more into Mac Brown and that identity? Or are you actually buying into Shane Beamer and what he has built now in terms of his tenure in South Carolina? They went toe-to-toe, obviously, with Notre Dame in the bowl game, in a position to pull that matchup out, lost by 7 points. But it also comes down to the progression of Spencer Rattler. Last 3 games of the regular season, 11 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. He completed 66% of his passes, 3,012 yards, 18 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. But this team became more physical. They went toe-to-toe with the likes of Tennessee and abused them. Rattler had a dynamic performance. They also went toe-to-toe against Clemson. They trailed 14-0 in that ball game and absolutely abused Clemson in the second half. They handed the Clemson Tigers only their second loss in Death Valley straight up since 2015. I think this team is evolving. I think they could be potentially a dark horse pick for the SEC East. Telltale sign will be week 3 against Carson Beck and Georgia in Athens, so keep an eye out for that. But I think they're the more complete team. I like what Spencer Rattler and this offense have. I like Shane Beamer, coupled with the fact of North Carolina's defense shot last year, 271 passing yards per game. They allowed opposing quarterbacks to complete 66% of their passes, allowed and gave up 27 touchdowns and only forced 9 interceptions. That defense gave up 35 points per game. That ranked 115th out of all of FBS in terms of pass defense and points per game. So keep an eye out for that. Total defense ranked 115th out of 131 total teams. That's why I give the edge to South Carolina. Catching 2.5 points, I think they win the ball game outright over Drake May in this ball game. Another big battle takes place in terms of Bloomington. You're talking about Ohio State laying a huge number. Line opened up at 30 and a half. It is now down to 29 and a half, depending upon where you look. But this series has been dominated, and I mean dominated, by the Ohio State Buckeyes. They've actually won 28 straight over the Indiana Hoosiers. Actually, one of the wins was vacated because of the Jim Tressel situation, so it looks like 27, but they still won on the field. It's 28 straight games. They picked up this victory last year, 56-14. The last 4, Ohio State has won those games by an average margin of victory of 34.2 points per game. Kyle McCord potentially gets the start in Bloomington. Obviously, Brian Hartline is calling the plays over Ryan Day, but this also comes down to the identity with Tom Allen as head coach. I put him on the hot seat at the start of the year. Overall, during his tenure in Bloomington, he is 30-40 overall. More importantly, just 2-16 within the Big Ten. They were 2-7 last year, lost those 7 games against Big Ten opponents by an average margin of defeat of 19.1 points per game. That's not going to get it done, even though they're at home in this matchup. Their last win against Ohio State came back in 1988 by a score of 41-7. I think it's all Ohio State. Love them or hate them. I don't think Ohio State is the team to beat in the Big Ten. On paper right now, it is, in my opinion, Michigan and Penn State. I think Ohio State does have 2 losses on the year, but I think they cover this number, the 29-point number, week 1 in Bloomington. The trend says that. Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Ibuka, Travion Henderson, and that offense, I think, will be able to challenge a defense that is just not up to speed with the Ohio State offense. Ohio State rolls and covers the 29-point number Saturday afternoon in Bloomington. On the flip side, we have Alabama laying a huge number against Middle Tennessee State. We know about Nick Saban. Keep in mind that Nick Saban and Alabama have that week 2 matchup at home in Tuscaloosa against Texas and Steve Sarkisian. Very important, and I'll touch on that before I go. But you look at the statistics for Alabama overall. Dominant at home. Since 2016, they are 46-1 straight up at home in Bryant-Denny. They were 7-0 last year, won those games by an average margin of victory of basically 32 points per game. They just don't lose at home. More importantly, they haven't lost a week 1 matchup since 2001. They have won 21 straight games at home in Tuscaloosa, not at home, 21 straight week 1 ball games by an average margin of victory of 27.3 points per game. Got this victory last year over Cooper Lagasse and Logan Bonner in that matchup. For Utah State, they laid a 40.5-point number and won going away 55-0. But keep in mind, Middle Tennessee State on the road, they actually struck the upset against Miami last year as a 26.5-point dog. They're now catching almost 40 points. It's down to 39. I think Alabama utilizes, and I think Milroe does get the start. I think they utilize their legs, run the football with Jace McClellan. I don't think Nick Saban's going to want to show a whole lot with that week 2 battle on deck with obviously Quinn Ewers in Texas. I think Alabama wins, but I do feel that Middle Tennessee State does cover the 39-point number Saturday night in Tuscaloosa. And I'll touch on this in regards to the week 2 look ahead for Alabama. When can you remember Alabama being now under a touchdown as a home favorite? I'll go back to 2 games in particular. When you think about it, they were a 5-point favorite during the Mac Jones and Devontae Smith era against Georgia. That was the game where it was a close first half. They pulled it away and won 41-21 in terms of dominating style and fashion in Bryant-Denny. That was en route to a national championship with Mac Jones. The other game that you could remember offhand was a basically 5.5 point favorite against Joe Burrow and LSU. That was the game with Tua. They lost that matchup 46-41. The books actually believe that Texas should be in this ball game. They're already catching 6.5 on the road. Like I mentioned, 46-1 straight up in Bryant-Denny. So that's the week 2 look ahead. We'll see how it plays out. Stay with me all season long at GoForThe2.com. I'll see you on Saturday. Have a great week, everyone.